Hello there, sociologists. Welcome to the last, I suppose, instalment on video for this lockdown. When you come back on in school, there won't be a video, I guess, because we've been asked to set silent work. So this is the last video. I'm going to take you through the last section of observations. We're going to be looking specifically at methods in context. But first, I'll have a sojourn by way of Positivist and Interpretivist, the extra bit. You know that the theory always comes with an extra bit at the end. There's a box that says theoretical issues. Then we talk about Positivists and Interpretivists, and they go under theoretical issues as well. So if you're ever asked about theoretical issues, it's about positivists and interpretivists and how they see the particular method. So I'll finish with that bit, then I'll do the context, or rather the method in context, and that'll take us to the end of the video lectures. I'm quite sad, really. I've enjoyed these. I hope they've worked for you, and if they haven't, I guess there's only this one to suffer through. So, without further ado, let's get on with it. We left the story, literally, right here, though it was a while ago. I recorded that, I think, back on Monday, and it's Friday now. I'm recording this in the morning because I am massively behind on everything that I'm trying to do, because of course I am. Having been so far ahead last week, I'm now massively behind. Not to worry, you won't notice. When this goes live, you'll be able to see it. Sorry, way too much information there. Let's move on. So, positivist views, how do they see particularly participant observation, the idea that you take part in the thing you are also observing? Well, positivists aren't a fan. They like structured non-participant observation. I've said that structured non-participant observation is less than 3. It's a meme. It's supposed to look like a heart. I don't know whether that's the sort of thing that you guys do on the intertubes or whether that just shows my age. I honestly don't know. But it's there and I've done it, and you can draw a heart or write the word love. I don't know. I've used so many pop culture references that are probably out of date. Why do they like it? Well, it's reliable, generalizable, that is, you can apply it to multiple situations rather than just the one you carry it out in, and it's representative. Standardized behavior categories allow replication. Anyone can go and carry out their own structured non-participant observation and do it with the same recipe. And you know how positivists love the idea of doing things again and repetition. They are essentially me in many ways. And that means it's reliable because you can check it. You think, those results don't look right. You carry out your own study and, oh, they are right. Excellent. What wonders? And also, because you've got predetermined observation categories, you can create quantitative data, you can make charts, you can make graphs, you can color code. Oh, it's wonderful. And you can do pie charts and all sorts. It's fun. You can do maths at it. And this means you can work out cause and effect relationships, etc. The ampersand there is the representation of the word et in Latin, meaning and. Cetera is the Latin for so on. Hence, et cetera, or etc. ECT is something else entirely, and I don't know what that means. Ec means nothing. So when people say etc., they're getting it wrong. It's a T. It's supposed to be the Latin et. Hence, that was rather too much information, wasn't it? I apologise. Let's get back to the point. Furthermore, positivists love structured observation because, well, it's quicker. You can do structured observation very quickly indeed, a day, maybe 2. That means you can carry out large numbers of structured observations. It means your sample size is larger. That means it's more representative. That means it's more useful in terms of setting things like policy. You'll remember in Families and Households where we talked about government policy and how that can affect families and households. You all hated it. It was in a booklet, don't worry. The larger the sample size means the more you can inform government policy. And some sociologists, especially positivists, argue that is the role and point of sociology, that there is a practical outcome as a result of the work that's carried out by sociologists. And I can see that. Otherwise, it's just navel-gazing and weird, though I'm quite keen on navel-gazing and weirdness. Navel, it's your belly button. It means staring downwards and having a look at something that's neither here nor there. Hence, navel gazing. It's not like watching ships or something. Something else. However, no! Interpretivists go, no, validity, you fools! The structured observation gives us nothing. Structure imposes views. We decide what is worthwhile writing down, and when we come on to methods in context, I'll come back to this point. So, hang fire. We're going there. But they argue that participant observation actually gives you a true picture. If sociology has any point at all, it's understanding how society works. And if you don't know how society works, you can make all the graphs in the world, and they will be meaningless and really unhelpful. And you can inform government policy to your heart's content, but you won't learn how people operate. Validity is what you need. Participation gives first-hand insight into what meanings people attach to the activities they carry out and the behaviour they use to do it, especially if covert, because people are not performing. They are being more themselves. Not perfect. Interpretivist agrees, not perfect. But it's better than most other methods. You want to learn who people really are, then you want to make them feel like they're not being watched. And you know this. You are very different people when you are not being observed by people you think have certain agendas than you are, let's say, in a classroom. You are a different person in a school classroom than you are at home with your parents. You are a different person out with your friends than you are at home with your parents or in the classroom. And you're a different person again online, sometimes multiple different people on multiple online platforms. That's just the way it is. That's how humans operate. So, covert observation will allow us to see that. Thus, best for qualitative data. Any method going, this one is best for qualitative data. It allows Verstehen, that idea of full compassion and understanding. And because most sociologists in the early period are German, we use the German word to understand, Verstehen. And basically, participant observation rules okay. It is the best. It is the bee's knees, the badger's honey. It is the greatest thing. It is the showman. It is it's the best of all the High School Musicals, which of course is the first. So I will fight you on that. So there you go. That's observation. There's your theory. Let's take a moment to pause. Okay, now into context. And the most terrifying image I could find, a classroom observation. Now, I don't know how you view classroom observations. I find them utterly terrifying. I can't speak for my colleagues. Some teachers love them. I've talked before about how I do a particular lesson and make sure I'm being observed, but that's a very different thing. I wear a very, very clear role in that, and I'm therefore able to invite people into my classroom. Most of the time, someone comes in to watch, and I am terrified. I just don't like being watched. I'm not doing anything wrong, but then I suppose my reaction makes people think that maybe I am. I don't know. The point is, it's a terrifying image for me. For you're looking at it going, yeah, and. So how do you use observation in an educational context? What's it good for? Because you remember, the 20-mark question gives you an idea about what they want you to study and a method they want you to study it with. And the idea is you go, well, I know the advantages and disadvantages of the method, and therefore I can say why it's good or bad for this particular thing. You may know studies, but don't worry if you don't, as long as you explain with reasonable examples and make sure that it makes sense. The idea is, even if you have studies that are carried out with a different method, you can explain how they might be better or worse than using the method you're being asked to apply. And that's the whole point. It's supposed to be thinking on your feet. It's not something one revises and memorises in advance. It's something one knows and therefore can answer. So here, and you'll notice I've done this with all the methods in context so far, there's been a box that tells you what it can be used for in an ideal world and where it's best. The uses in this case, where is observation best? It can be used to observe gender and classroom behaviour. Do girls genuinely behave better than boys? My experience, by the way, of teaching boys and girls sets is no. They behave about the same, just in very different ways. And largely that's less down to gender and more, I think, down to location. Low-level disruption at Ecclesbourne, for example, is the highest I've ever known, and I've taught at some awful places. However, high-level disruption and outright sort of violence is lower. But yeah, your low-level disruption is weirdly high. I don't know what that says about things. 2, it's also good for doing teacher expectations and labelling, because you remember that these are unconscious, and observation allows you to see things that people don't know they are doing, and that's the whole point. You can't ask them about it, they don't know they're doing it. I think I even said that in a previous video. It's also good for speech codes in the classroom, because you get to see it in the flesh, so to speak. You get to see how people use codes, and there are codes, there are euphemisms, turns of phrase, ways of using words that everybody accepts. One school I taught in had, had a positive discipline system. So you would say, and you'd actually say these words, I'm giving you a verbal warning, or that's your verbal warning, or verbal warning. You just say the words. And that was known. It was a code. Everyone understood that code. They knew what it meant, because the next step on the ladder would be writing in the planner a written comment. You say, I'm giving you a comment. And then those built up to detention, and everybody understood all of that. So the code, I'm giving you a verbal warning, meant that, shut up, get on with your work. And it worked. Or, alternatively, if you were like me, you built in pre-verbal warnings and went, do you want me to make this official? I can make it a verbal warning if you like. And people are like, oh, sorry. Because it wasn't quite at the level where I needed to flex. I just wanted people to, get on with things. Or you see what I mean? You could use that code. Now, no such code exists, to my knowledge, in Ecclesbourne. There are other codes instead. You might know that some teachers will say, oh, it's good, but it's not right. And you know what that means. And you might know, well, actually doesn't mean it's good. It means that I've got it utterly wrong, but they don't want to say so. I don't know. I don't know what the codes are in Ecclesbourne. I'm sure I use them all the time. And maybe when we get back, you can tell me what my codes are and tell me off for using them. And maybe you can even play bingo and tell me what you're playing bingo with. I'll explain later. Also, pupil subcultures. It's a really good way of keeping track of what pupils are up to. Of course, you could argue with some pupil subcultures it's better than others. If you've got a pupil subculture that plays truant a lot, i.e. isn't in the classroom, observation's pretty rubbish, because they're not there. It's good for teacher and pupil racism. Again, this whole idea of unconscious bias. Things you don't know you are doing, observation will pick that up more than any other method, because other methods require you to observe your own behaviour. And it's really good, I spelled racism correctly. It's also really good for the hidden curriculum, which you remember is the Marxist theory, that schools don't teach what they say they teach other things at the same time, and arguably more so than they do the things they say they teach. The 7 lessons of the school teacher I have lurking around on my system somewhere. I can share it with you when you return. And that implies that schools teach a whole bunch of other things. The unrelating of things, how one lesson doesn't lead into the next. How emotional dependency, you've got to ask if it's okay to exhibit a particular feeling. And academic dependency, you don't know you're right until a teacher has told you so. That's the hidden curriculum. I'm sure you've got more examples than that. Mr. Cuthbert went into far more detail than I have just there, but it's of interest to me as well. Oh, that's turned up in the wrong place. That's supposed to turn up halfway through this. I've done it the wrong way around. I apologise. FIAC, I'll come on to in a moment. But let's talk about structured observations first of all. Positivists love them, hence my smiley face. Because they're pre-categorised and you can apply them anywhere. And you can sit in a classroom and you jot down with numbers and references how to do it. Let's talk about the practicalities of this. Most structured observations tend to use something like the Flanders system of interaction analysis categories, and they code them every 30 seconds. So what you do is you take the FIAC, it's over there on the right, with its 10 categories: teacher accepting pupil feelings, teacher praising or encouraging pupils, teacher accepting or using pupils' ideas, teacher asking questions, teacher lecturing, what I'm doing right now, teacher giving directions, it's that way and to the left. No, I mean, you write down the title, underline it with a ruler, that's directions. Teacher criticising pupils, no, that's the wrong answer. Or justifying authority, excuse me, that's your verbal warning. Pupil talk, pupils respond to the teacher, oh, I know the answer. Or pupils initiate the talk, sir, what's this mean? Or presumably talking amongst themselves. And then there's silence, which is silence or confusion, which is an interesting one. Anyway, I'll come back to that. And basically what you do is you jot down every 30 seconds what's going on in the classroom. And this gives you a quantitative data very easily, because you can categorize the different behaviors, put them in like a bar chart or a chart itself, color code it, and then you can work out how much time is spent on each individual category. The person that came up with this system, Flanders, in 1970, found that in the typical US classroom, Statesian classroom, 68% of the time was filled with teacher talk, categories 1 through 7. 20% of the time was pupil talk, categories 8 through 9. And 12% of the time was, in their words, lost to silence or confusion. I'm not entirely convinced by that phrasing, by the way, because lost to silence or confusion? Sometimes confusion is necessary. As a history teacher, for example, much of my lessons rely on a bit of confusion. It relies on setting things up that you think you know about and then going, well, actually, no. And everyone goes, ooh, and then there's a moment. And you have to let that moment land. And that's silence. That's not lost time. Not in my opinion, anyway. But what do I know? I'm a teacher, not a sociologist, observing teachers. Well, I kind of am observing teachers all the time, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean. Also, I think there's categories that are lost there. What about the categories of the teacher going off on a tangent? I don't think that's in there. Do my tangents count as lectures? Hellfire, I hope not. That's terrifying. However, good points. Positivists say these are cheaper, quicker, and easier to carry out. You don't need much training to do this. You just need to know what the different categories are. That's it. Train to spot the categories, write them down. Anyone can do that. Heck, I could recruit you, and you could do it in other lessons. Ooh, that's almost tempting. And then find out and compare and see whether that comparison is any good. Ooh, that is really, really interesting. Ooh, I have a fimbly feeling. You might know the Fimbles, you might not. And we could do that. We could. Ooh. Anyway, getting back to the point. Goodness, it's 16 minutes in already. I'm halfway. Validity is limited. Delamont pointed out that this is great, but it lacks meanings. I mean, this idea of teacher criticizing pupils, in some instances, students might like that. They might thrive on it. One of the, and I'm going to have to use a personal example, and forgive me, but one of the things that I was once told I was doing very well in teacher training was that my criticism was such that students used it and sought it, i.e. they tested the boundaries of their academic knowledge to find out where they butted up against my criticism. And they preferred that because I generally tended to deliver it with praise, because it allowed them to improve. My criticism was not attacking. It was not seen as dangerous. However, one of the major criticisms that I've received in Ecclesbourne is that I can be hypercritical, and some students find it really difficult because they think I'm having a go at them, when I'm not. I'm just pointing out how to improve work. Points to mug. Because I can't help myself, and I tend not to sugarcoat things. If something is rubbish, I'll say so. And I'll use that word too, and people get upset about that. In other words, Delamont points out these categories lack the meanings that the people in the classroom may attach to them, and as a consequence, you can't really tell whether it really is comparable across two different places. There's also reliability. It's great because structured observation schedules allow for replication. That's good. That's good when it comes to reliability, hence my smiley face. Also, quantitative data. Yay! And you can compare quantitative data. Of course, you might not be comparing the same things. One teacher's criticism may be very different to another teacher's criticism. One of the greatest teacher criticisms I ever heard, and I say greatest because it's amusing, dangerous, and not something I'll ever do in a classroom, was a teacher who was angry with a student and said, I'm thinking of a word, it begins with a T, it ends with a T, and it has a W in it. And the student went, you can't call me that. And they said, I was thinking twit. You see where we're going. That criticism, I would argue, is more damaging than the criticism of, oh, you need to underline your title. They are both criticism, but the meaning is significantly different. If you didn't get the previous joke, well done you. You shouldn't. If you didn't find that funny, don't worry, I'm not going to explain it. So those two criticisms are different. One is damaging and pretty awful, actually. It's funny out of context, if that makes sense. But the other one is actually quite supportive And you could argue that a student would respond differently to both of those criticisms. I think they would, because obviously they would. So yeah, it's comparable, but you might not be comparing apples with apples or oranges with oranges. You might be comparing apples and oranges. I'm really trying with the humour today, and I'm not sure I'm doing terribly well. So let's look at unstructured observation, which is by far the more common style. Or rather, is it more common? It's more interesting to talk about, so I guess there's more evidence. Because structured observation studies, there are lots of them. There's loads of comparative data. Cool, but you don't really get to talk about them much because people just use FIAC. So what are the unstructured practicalities? Well, the first thing to point out is that schools are a complex setting. When Lacey carried out their school observation, and I'll come on to Lacey later, it took 2 months just to get familiarised with the school itself. 2 months before they could start making decent observations. Speaking as a member of staff, when a new member of staff joins a school, or when I've joined a school as a new member of staff, it can take quite a while to get used to how the school works. In my very first job, I was reasonably quick. I was, getting most of it by the first month. But the style of using overheads as a form of aid in a classroom, I didn't actually twig how to use them properly until probably around about Christmas holidays. That's 3 months in. And finding my way around the campus, the site, well, that took much longer. Within the first year, I knew my way around most places, but I was still finding areas of the school that I didn't know about right up until I left 4 years later. When I went back after 2 years away from that school and taught for another 4 years, I did find a brand new set of classrooms that had always been there, but I'd never been there myself, so I didn't know they existed. It was news to me. They'd been there the entire time. That was sort of 7 years in. So, and that's not counting new builds. My point being, it takes a while to familiarise yourself with a new building. It takes a while to familiarise yourself with how things work there. Ecclesbourne took me a while to settle into. Though arguably I had an advantage in that it was very similar to where I came from in many ways. I was still learning how Ecclesbourne worked in my second year of teaching, and arguably still am. Eggleston, in 1976, took 3 months to set up his cover to carry out his observations. 3 months before he could actually get round to doing his observation thing. That's a long time in a sociologist's study time. You can see the potential problems here with unstructured observation. It takes a very long time to get it sorted, to get it ready, before you can even use any of the stuff you've collected to make any use of things. However, you might find it's easier to gain permission to observe lessons than it is to carry out interviews or questionnaires, for example. What's the other one that we started with? Field experiments. It's far easier just to say, I'd like to watch a lesson, please. For example, Fuller, when he was carrying out his observations of London schools, found that the head teacher was very much on board. They believed that it would be good for students to see a non-teaching adult around the place and just get used to the idea that there are other adults in the world. So there was no parental permission needed to carry out the observations. That's brilliant. That just makes things dirt simple. And you can find loads of stuff just by doing that. So practically, it might be easier to get permissions, though harder to set up. Also, the age, gender, and ethnicity of the observer, the researcher, will play a role. So, for example, Wright in 1992 found that as an Afro-Caribbean woman, she got an antagonistic response from white teachers who tended to find her critical or seeking to undermine them in some way. But black students tended to place her in high regard, asking for help from her before asking the teachers. Now, that is down to age, gender, and ethnicity. It just is. It absolutely is. Young teachers and old teachers are responded to differently. You'll have noticed that with your own experience. Once I was a young teacher, and now I'm just a teacher. I'm not quite old yet. Though I'm getting there. The grey in the beard is getting greyer. The grey around the temples, even though my hair is longer, is growing more noticeable. Soon I shall be an old teacher. And then I shall experience old teacher reactions. I genuinely look forward to it, for I'm a very sad man. Also, your unstructured observations are restricted in a number of ways. There are timetables, holidays, access, legal concerns, health and safety issues, changes in classrooms, changes in absences and what have you. You get restricted by a lot of things, basically, not all of which you can plan for, and not all of which will be terribly conducive to your study. Also, there's busyness. That is the time and space to write up your observation notes. Now, if you're doing this overtly and you're just observing in a classroom, you can sit in the back of the classroom and write things down. You may have been subjected to that by me at some point. I have been and observed other colleagues. You may have noticed me in a room. I tend not to look up. I tend to listen very carefully, and I tend to scribble everything down as and when it occurs. I move around, I don't talk much, and I write a lot. That's got to be off-putting for everyone concerned. I'm not doing it deliberately, it's just so I don't forget things. Most of what I write down is just rubbish and goes no further. I'm literally writing down what's happening so later I can reflect upon it and work out what's going on. So I'll write down quotes, I'll write down bits of information, I'll write down ordering timings, and then I'll work out later whether or not that's relevant at all. Most of the time it actually isn't. It's just helpful because it reminds me of what was going on in the classroom at that moment. But you can see why that might be okay, but have its issues. You've got to go back and review it later. Hammersley, when he was observing staff, found that when he was in staff rooms, it was often quite difficult to write things down. Teachers tended to view him with suspicion. So he couldn't write down stuff as it was happening. He couldn't write up his notes whilst the teachers were there. That would affect how they responded and would render much of his study impossible to do. So what he did was he had to do it covertly. He had to try and remember what was said and then scribble it down as quickly as possible afterwards. In one case, he scribbled down an observation on a newspaper and then had to run out with the newspaper before anyone else saw what he'd done. That can be difficult. I've noticed that I take notes all the time in staff briefings, for example, in a staff room. Often I'm not writing down notes from the staff briefing, I'm planning my day, or I'm writing down lists of things to remember, or I'm recording stuff that happened at home last night so I don't forget it. Like for diaries and stuff, like, we had this discussion, we agreed that we're going to go out shopping on Friday. I'm like, I must write that down whilst it's still in my brain, because I am that sado. But it's got to be off-putting for everyone around me, and it means I've gained something of a reputation. You've probably noticed, if you've ever been subjected to it, me scribbling down in an assembly. I have a book that I take to assembly with me. Am I writing down the assembly? Sometimes yes. Am I writing down what students are doing? No, never actually. Sorry, I just don't do that. I do write down plans for the day though, or write down long form thoughts that I'm having about lessons and ideas so that I can read them back to myself later. So there's that. Sometimes I'll just doodle numbers or diagrams because I'm bored. The point being, it gives me a bit of a reputation. Hammersley didn't want that reputation because it could lead to problems. So, yeah, and he also said that writing it up later meant that he often forgot things or had to rely on his own impression of what was said rather than the exact words, which may have led to not accurate representations of what was going on. And he was accepting of that and pointed it out in his study. And you can see how that would occur. We're at 28 minutes already? Goodness. So I'll tease on reliability. Are unstructured observations reliable? Well, if you're a participant study, generally no. The data is unsystematic and hard to replicate. Hammersley's newspaper in the staff room, yeah, that's great, but how do you do that again? How does anyone else check that is common? How does anyone else work out whether or not you've observed the correct thing or whether or not you've observed something that was put on for your benefit? The data itself is difficult to record. How do you record a scribbled note on a newspaper? Do you copy it up later? Do you take a photograph of it? What do you do with that? And then there's the personal characteristics and responses. Wright, remember, an Afro-Caribbean woman, her ethnicity allowed her to gain access to some students who saw her as a better option than the white teacher. Had she been a white middle-class male, that would have been very different. A researcher trying to follow and find the same things wouldn't be able to because of their own background. Therefore, is what she found reliable? Well, kinda, but how do you prove that? Oh, that is difficult. I've told you the story before of the behaviour support worker who became a head of year and the difference in how students responded to them, simply through position. Nothing else changed. They wore the same clothes. They were indeed the same person. So sometimes it's just a case of positional change or time of day or location. A student may respond differently in a classroom to they'll respond in a corridor, or to how they'll respond in a sports hall, or to how they'll respond on a field. I've seen that with students I know, and I'm sure you've seen it yourselves. So yeah, there are potential issues. We are now at 30 minutes. Goodness, time flies when you're having fun, eh? I will probably therefore record a second video on this, just because I can. And then on the Tuesday's lesson, I will set you something you can do silently and without my input. So I guess this isn't the last video, like I said at the top of it. My apologies. If you've survived this long, and you have been, thank you very much for watching. I hope it's been useful. I hope it's been helpful. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video, or if not, to seeing you in classroom. We'll see how it goes. Have a lovely rest of your day. Don't work too hard. And yeah, I'll see you around. Bye-bye now.